Video games are supposed to allow you to escape the real world, yet somehow it's really cool when video games interact with the real world anyway. Most games in the 80s and 90s resolutely avoided these tricks, but when the gameplay was integrated into the real world, it could result in some really cool features. Let's talk about 6 games that required you to commit some action in the real world. Prince of Persia is a classic action-adventure game. Premiering on the Apple II in 1989, the platformer created remarkably fresh animation, cinematic sequences, and a real sense of tension by forcing you to race against the clock to escape. Avoiding traps, developing quick reflexes, and understanding how to kill enemies was critical. Falling, or getting hit, meant that you could lose life, or triangles. These guys in the corner of the screen. Lose all of your triangles, and you died. But fear not, because like most adventure games, you had opportunities to restore your life through potions, and it is through those potions that Broderbund, the developer and publisher of Prince of Persia, got really interesting. The Apple version of this classic had 12 levels. On level 2, you come to this screen. As you can see, there are tons of potions here, each corresponding to a different letter. There is also this code at the bottom. As you may have surmised, that code required you to look in the game's instruction manual, which, for your sake, I really hope you hadn't thrown out. Drink the right potion, and you get some of your life restored, and can continue the game. Drink the wrong potion, well, you lose a health bar, and you also can't proceed. Even more frustrating is that no, you couldn't ask your friends for help. The word you had to look for changed every time you played the game, although it did seem that there were at least a limited number of potential letters that the challenge letter could be. Like many other checks required for games at the time, this system was implemented as a rudimentary form of copyright protection and to deter computer game piracy. However, this specific feature was somewhat unique. Extensive guides have since been put together to allow users to bypass this check, but for the time, well, it sucked. Of course, this was far from the only way that video games used real-world objects, and thankfully, not all of these systems were implemented in an attempt to thwart piracy. For an example, we turn to the Uncanny X-Men. This 1989 Nintendo game, the first ever to star the X-Men in video game form, was based off of the X-Men comic series and published by LJN. The game is a 2D action platformer. In it, you play as one of 5 different X-Men, all of whom have different powers. You fight your way through 6 different levels, the usual stuff. The game was actually terrible. It was badly reviewed, sold poorly, and wound up being the last ever released by LGN, a publisher that had a spotty track record. They also made the Back to the Future games, so yeah. Anyway, the one actual memorable sequence of this game was incredibly stupid. There are 5 regular levels in the game, 1 labeled practice and 4 other ones. Beat the last level and you are dropped back on the mission select screen as opposed to going to the final boss fight. Why? Why not? So, what do? Is that the end of the game? Well, no. Let's go back to the cartridge. Yeah, see that code? B up together with start? That's how you access the final boss. Except it isn't. Inputting that code on the level select screen actually doesn't do anything. Instead, you have to hit select B up and then start. So there's a secret level, and the label is actually wrong. Or so it seems. Players who didn't find the code were left to think that the game was weird, dumb, or broken. Players who did, and didn't realize that the secret code was in fact not complete, were left thinking that they were idiots. However, there is a solution. Through a convoluted series of in-game events, namely the killing of 30 different colored enemies on each stage, and you get these special words. Get the words right, and you get this secret message. The last mission can be reached from the mission screen by pushing select, and seek the advice of the label to make it to the final mission. Why? What? Never mind. Regardless, get the code and you fight Magneto. God! Next, Professor Layton and the Diabolical Box, or Pandora's Box, as it was released in Europe. This was the second Professor Layton game and was released exclusively for the Nintendo DS. The entire game was based on solving puzzles, some of which are optional, some of which are required to advance. The puzzles tended to take on relatively similar forms, including as brain teasers or puzzles that required you to use the DS stylus to slide pieces into a certain end state. However, one puzzle got really interesting. Titled A Ticket to Where, your job is to try and figure out where a character is traveling. To do that, you have to fold the ticket a certain way, but that's not something you can do with the DS. So what does that require you to do? Fold the real ticket that came with the game. Doing so allows you to figure out where the character is going, which is the in-game town of Folsense. You can then input the missing number, which is 2, in order to progress with the game. The puzzle took a lot of players by surprise because it isn't something that the Professor Layton games did often. This game was the second in the series, and the first game, as well as really the entire series, have never done anything quite like this. However, it would serve as an early preview of another promotional effort by Level 5, the developer of the Professor Layton games. This puzzle game, called Layton's Mystery Journey, featured 50 real-world puzzles that were scattered throughout the world. Players could solve these puzzles and use social media to post about the results as well as collaborate with each other. As long as we're on the DS, let's talk about the game Trace Memory, a 2005 game. Trace Memory is a mystery game. You play as Ashley Mizuki Robbins, and your job is to solve puzzles as you explore Blood Edward Island, yikes on the name, and try to locate your missing father. The game uses a point-and-click system that requires you to use the DS stylus or D-pad to solve puzzles. You also have to interact with people across the island to learn clues to your father's location. The game didn't make a massive impact on the gaming world, though it did perform well enough to get a sequel. However, Trace Memory did have one very memorable puzzle that went way outside of the standard gameplay. At one point, you were playing in the in-game location of Henry's study, trying to advance. You'll find a picture frame. In order to move on, you need more information. How do you get it? Well, weirdly enough, you have to close your DS. Sort of. Half close the DS and look at the lower screen. You get two pieces of information, the code F3 and a key in a book. Armed with this information, you now know that you are looking for a key that can be located in a book. That book, of course, is in the third row of shelf F. Get the code, and you advance. This was one of the more creative uses of the DS, which often took advantage of its physical features in order to get players to move on. We now turn to Metal Gear Solid 1. Metal Gear, of course, is a series known for using some of the strangest and most meta twists in the world of video games. The entire Metal Gear series set the bar for stealth, creativity, and often blowing your mind. The game was a massive commercial and critical hit, and as the first Metal Gear game of the 3D era, Metal Gear Solid 1 let players know what to expect from the series moving forward. It also allowed you to turn into a box. In the game, you play as Solid Snake and are attempting to free hostages while also stopping terrorists from launching a nuclear strike. This involves working with a series of allies and hostages who Snake has to release. One of the more important tools in the game was the codec, a part communications device and part strategy guide. At one critical section of the game, you have to contact Merrill in order to get additional information, including on how to stop the rogue launch of nuclear weapons. Seems important. To connect with Merrill, Snake needs the right frequency. The standard gamer would likely begin to look around the play area, open inventory, flipping things over, and do whatever they could to find the frequency, of which there are, well, many. However, that's not it. This is Metal Gear, and that means that things will be strange. You can find the frequency on the back of the literal CD case. Don't have the case? Well, it was the late 90s, so maybe you could find it online, but otherwise you were locked out of progressing. What makes this clue particularly devious is that the picture is just chilling like a normal picture. It's nothing obvious, and that absolutely threw many gamers off. Once the frequency is entered, Snake connects with Merrill, who gives him critical information about the base that he has entered and the terrorists who run it. They also have a weird, flirty conversation. The 90s were odd. Next, Uncharted Golden Abyss. This was the fourth game in the Uncharted series, which was published for various PlayStation platforms and developed by the famed developer Naughty Dog Entertainment. For those of you who are unfamiliar, you play as Nathan Drake and travel across the world, collecting treasures, stealing items, solving mysteries, and being casually good-looking. Golden Abyss was the first entry for the series on the PlayStation Vita, which was PlayStation's 6th generation handheld platform. The functionality of the Vita allowed for some very interesting gaming instructions and included an extremely unique moment in Golden Abyss. At one point in Chapter 13, Drake receives a parchment, but it's blank. Drake comments about needing light in order to see the puzzle answer, but again, unless you know what he's talking about, you might find yourself out of luck. The answer to this riddle is real light. Actual, literal, real-world light. You need to use your Vita's rear camera and shine it to a nearby light source. Doing so will reveal a message on the parchment and enable you to continue the game. However, like many other design decisions that required interaction with the real world, this one wasn't great. Many players complained about the temperamental nature of the system, and players who were playing in a dark or cloudy atmosphere were pretty much out of luck. I never experienced it myself, but I will say that this issue reveals a relatively constant problem with systems like this. If they aren't implemented properly, they get real finicky real quick. Finally, returning to a Nintendo classic, StarTropics, which has one of the earliest entries on a list like this. StarTropics is a 1990 Nintendo action-adventure game with a distinctly American feel, so American that it was actually never released in Japan. The game also featured extensive action RPG elements and also added a periodic puzzle. Right, puzzles. So the game came with this physical letter from the main character's Uncle Steve. You play as Mike and are basically on a mission to rescue your uncle. The letter is cute, and it seems like a real-world way of creating in-game immersion. Of course, it's actually so much more. In Chapter 4, Mike has to input a frequency to advance the game's story. Where do you get the frequency? Nowhere in the game, actually. It goes back to the original letter. The character Babu, your uncle's assistant, tells you your uncle's last words. Tell Mike to dip my letter into water. That letter, which also has a note at the bottom to hold onto it until the end of the game, as well as instructions not to eat the note, good advice honestly, has to be dipped in water. Doing so reveals a secret message from Uncle Steve written in invisible ink that lists the game's frequency. There was some debate about the purpose of this letter. Was it designed to be an anti-piracy feature or just meant to be a bit of fun? Nintendo was absolutely struggling with piracy at the time, so that could have had something to do with it, and the game was internally developed by Nintendo's R&D3 studio. Rental markets may have also played a role. Nintendo hated video game rentals, and actually took Blockbuster to court for use of their instruction manuals of all things, so that may have played a role. All of this being said, the fact that gimmicks were used so infrequently in Nintendo's game development leads me to think that Nintendo was just trying to have a bit of fun. Of course, these games all turned out to be precursors to much larger adventures. Thanks to the advent of new technology, including augmented reality, games like Pokemon Go and many, many others now require real-world interaction. Still, for the time periods these games were made, they were very different, pretty impressive, and extremely fourth-wall breaking. I think I researched this one pretty good, but I know I missed some games. Please let us know in the comments below what features I might be missing. If you enjoyed these videos and want to see more, we've got more. You can actually join as a 8-bit or 16-bit channel member today, which allows you access to exclusive chat, social options, shoutouts, and more. You can also subscribe and click on the next video that the almighty YouTube algorithm has served up to you. As always, my friends, thank you so much for being here, and hope you enjoyed watching this video as much as I liked making it. Take care, everybody.